organization called U.S. Term Limits. We're based in Washington, D.C. We've been around since 1991. We're the largest, oldest, most successful term limits advocacy organization in the country. And today, a meeting of the Constitutional Modernization Commission was scheduled to be held regarding a proposal that would shred Ohio's voter-approved 8-year term limits law. It's argued that the primary purpose of this commission was basically to submit this proposal. The idea of having an independent commission make such a proposal is a common tool used across the country by legislatures, particularly when they're trying to get something pushed through that benefits the members of the legislature directly, often at the expense of their constituents. To give you an example of this, recently in Arkansas, just about a month or so ago, there was an independent commission that studied whether or not legislators need a pay raise. Well, guess what? They need a pay raise. It's a game, and this is the way it's played. This commission is made up of 12 legislators, none of them advocates of term limits, and 20 appointees chosen by those 12 legislators. All right, so the core of this decision was already made before any meetings were held. The commission's made it hard for us to follow the progress of the commission, which might have made it hard for the journalists as well, you'd know. In any case, the rise of early opposition to this scheme may be partially an explanation of why the meeting was canceled today. I'm not sure. But you can be sure that the anti-term limits legislators will be back. And also that so will we. Now, who are we? Today I want to introduce some prominent Ohio citizens who are standing up to defend the People's Term Limits Law. I also want to recognize a couple of current legislators who are taking a principled stand on this issue. The people of Ohio approved 8-year term limits in 1992 with 68% of the vote. A recent Buckeye poll I know you've all seen showed that the same amount, roughly 70%, continue to support 8-year term limits, and that brand new polling from Ohioans for Good Government showed that some 78% oppose efforts to weaken the 8-year term limits to 12, as this commission would want to do. 8-year term limits are the most common in the nation, from the president to the governors, to state legislatures, to county commissions, to statewide officers, to city councils, to small town mayors. 8 years is the American term limit. There's no call for any special, bloated, supersized term limit for Ohio politicians. Particularly no call from the Ohio voters themselves, the ones who passed it originally. I want now to introduce some Ohio leaders who intend to make a stand to defend the people's term limits. I think what this might work out well is if I call your names, if you stand up here in a line, and then we'll have each of you make a couple of comments if you'd like, okay? First, Ohio Representative Ron Hood, please. And Ohio Representative Tom Brinkman. And Ohio Representative Tom Brinkman is not here, right? You have an aide, Andrew came in his place. You want to come up here? Former Ohio Majority Whip John Adams. Maurice Thompson, Executive Director of the 1851 Center for Constitutional Law. Former Ohio Representative Matt Lynch. And Warren County Republican Party Chair Ray Warrick. Now, Ray has informed us that he intends to create a political committee that's going to be the umbrella for opposition to the anti-term limits proposal. And Ray, do you want to say a few words about that? You want to come up here?
This morning I filed paperwork with the Secretary of State forming 8 is Enough Ohio PAC to at least start a framework to oppose this expansion of term limits. I find it kind of amusing that this whole thing starts in a commission called Ohio Constitutional Modernization Commission. What's modern about doing things to further hamper elected officials? They've been doing that since the beginning of time. If they wanted to do something modern in that commission, they may want to tighten up the term limits in Ohio. So we're going to oppose this every step of the way. And it's one of these breathtaking situations for me, because I don't run into any normal citizen who would say, oh yeah, let's let them have more time in office because they're doing such a great job. So we'll see.
Very good, thank you. Representative Lynch, would you like to say something?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. It's good to be back at the State House and see some old friends. You know, before I was in the state legislature, I was a trustee in Jogga County, Bainbridge Township, and in all those campaigns and in my congressional campaign last year, I never had any citizen come up to me and say, you know, the real problem with the legislature is that we just don't keep the same people in office long enough. I never heard anybody say that. In fact, what they would say is, the legislature's out of touch. They don't seem to be in touch with the citizens. And in fact, if you look at the voting patterns in Ohio in recent years, fewer and fewer and fewer people are voting. Even though we keep expanding the ability to vote, fewer people vote. Why is that? Because people feel that their legislators really are living in a political class that doesn't affect them. If we cannot keep at least 8-year term limits in place, we are just reinforcing that view of the legislature. So I am absolutely supportive of this effort to keep term limits, and as Ray said, even is tighten up term limits for the state of Ohio. And don't you think maybe we should do something about the folks in Congress as well?
Oh yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Thompson.
Sure. Thank you. And I've got a few short remarks, shorter than any other time that you hear me speak, maybe a little bit longer than Matt. I do want to just explain 1851 Center's position on the term limits issue and why that position is what it is, and also the mechanics of what you in the media can expect to see potentially going forward based upon how the law shakes out and what the options are. So we do support term limits, the caveat being that the term limits we have, we may have written more strictly had I been around. In 1992, I was 12 and busy with something else, so I didn't get a chance to draft these for U.S. term limits. Had I done so, I think I would have probably tried to guard against some of the chicanery with being able to switch from the House to the Senate. We may have considered maybe a lifetime limit, and we're still talking about that. So we may do our own amendment, which I'll get to momentarily. But we do support term limits, and what's interesting for you to know here is these came into effect in 1992. They were not retroactive, so you got 8 years. So 2000 was the first year that these things were ever really in play. And then we've got switching, you know, from the House to the Senate and back and forth. So here we are 8 years after that, and so now the term limits are really coming home to roost, in essence for the first time, 2008 and again in 2016. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as that happens, we see the same folks who are affected by these limits looking to loosen them, and we worry about incrementalism. So the first proposal appears to be a 12-year proposal, a 4-year expansion. But we're very concerned that 4 years becomes 8 over time, becomes 16, and what happens through incrementalism is these things become disbanded entirely. What we also worry about is special interest and corruption tie-ups, which seem to be more prominent without naming names around the State House here. Maybe later if you press me, but certainly we see an increase in special interest tie-ins, and you all know how that is. You see the legislators rushing off to special events after the House sessions are over, funded by one lobbying group or another, and that creates some alliances other than the alliance to the voter. And finally, the only legitimate method of dethroning incumbents these days with gerrymandering that we have and with some of the campaign finance regulations that we have, it is really term limits. So if we're going to have the government we have today in Ohio, term limits are one of the few ways of accomplishing any sort of meaningful turnover in the legislature. I understand there are some opposing arguments about, you know, the expertise of legislators and their experience. And what we really believe is that legislators aren't technocrats. Their philosophy and their backbone and their allegiance, not to special interests, but to their voters, is much more important than that. And then finally, the mechanics of what could happen, very briefly, the General Assembly has the ability, as you all know, to put issues on the ballot, constitutional amendments on the ballot. They have to do so 90 days at the latest before an election. So that means August, the first week of August, if they are going to put it on the November 2015 ballot. If they wanted to put it on the May 2016 ballot, they could also do that. I should say that I expect them to put it on the May 2016 ballot, but we are also prepared for them to put it on the November 2015 ballot if they decide to go that route. So we'll know that by the first week of August. So we're prepared to fight that campaign. U.S. term limits took the term limits issue all the way to the Supreme Court in the 90s, and they have a great deal of resources and capacity. And we're at 1851. We have firm understanding that they'll do whatever it takes. And in opposing the issue, what we can do is scrutinize the ballot language. What we've seen in some other states is that when legislators seek to loosen term limits, they use terms like, oh, this is for good government, this is for the ethics of the legislative branch of government, or they call it maybe even an anti-corruption act. So they use all kinds of glossy terms. So we'll be scrutinizing that kind of ballot language before the ballot board, with the Secretary of State, you said, and then to the Ohio Supreme Court if we have to. But what we can also do here, and we have the resources to do if we need to, is offer an alternative constitutional amendment. This could be a preemptive strike before the legislature places an issue on the ballot. This may be a simultaneous amendment at the same time that the legislature places the amendment on the ballot. Now, if that is the case, whichever measure gets more votes would be the prevailing measure. And we can also do a strike after the legislature places an amendment on the ballot. So their issue may pass, and we could come back to the very next election cycle with stricter term limits. And I want to stress in each of those cases the term limits will be stricter, or the other alternative is that we alter Article 16 of the Constitution to prevent the legislature from enacting or placing measures on the ballot that either raise their own pay or lengthen their own terms. We simply take that power away from the legislature rather than dealing with term limits directly. So those are the mechanics of what we might be looking at here. I hope that gives you kind of a roadmap to what to be looking for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Adams.
Well, thank you. There's not a lot I can add to the statistics of what was presented earlier, but I can tell you that as I go to the doors and talk to the next primary voters in my area of the state, which is West Central Ohio, there's a lot of frustration out there. A lot of frustration. I would caution the parties not to be feathering their nest by lengthening term limits, because I think the voters have just about had it with not getting anything done as they see it at the federal level or even at the state level. So I'd caution our politicians to not be feathering their nest as they would be in lengthening term limits at this time.
Thank you. Next, actually, before we hear from the representatives, I want to make a couple comments about that. Representatives Hood and Brinkman. I want to mention that I'm involved in a lot of these things, and it takes some bravery to stand up for what's right on issues like this, particularly when it necessarily means some kind of clash with members of your own party and even with your own leadership. And there's a certain amount of integrity that comes from a sitting incumbent legislator that is going to put their interests of their constituents above their own personal career interests. And for that reason, when we look at someone like Representative Hood, Representative Brinkman, who have actually signed a written pledge committing themselves to supporting and defending the voter-approved 8-year term limits law here in Ohio, they deserve to be recognized. And U.S. Term Limits would like to present both of those gentlemen with our Defender of Term Limits Award that we give to legislators across the country that take this step. So if, let's see, Representative Hood, over here. Would you like to say something? Sure.
Well, thanks so much for this. But obviously, term limits is one of those vehicles that's in place that really helps it helps to combat the corruption we have in the political process. When there is a corrupt system behind the scenes, things that go on when legislation is decided, without term limits, you have people in positions for an awful long time, and the longer these people are in those positions, the more they feel they can get away with not being in touch with the voters back home. And I've seen that firsthand. It seems that the longer someone's in place, that can happen. One of the biggest reasons why we really need to have term limits, and there's a couple other reforms that would be very essential as well to combat that. And one is the campaign finance reform that was discussed earlier, where the party caucuses control all the money, and there's limits on the individual, but yet the party caucuses are totally unlimited. Well, that right there means you're not beholden to your legislators back home. You're beholden to the party leadership. The other thing is appointments, the appointment process, and when someone gets near the end of their term limits, they can maybe get a particular job somewhere, and then whether it be in the administration or somewhere else, and then someone can be appointed, and then you could have that go on a perpetual basis, to where no one ever gets a chance to vote on a new legislator. They're only voting to accept or reject the legislator that was put there by people that do not live in their district. And if you want to go against that legislator that doesn't live in their district, you're going up against the caucus money machine. So it is with the three stools that we need in the table to stop the corruption would be term limits, and remove the appointment process, and reform the campaign finance laws. But thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, Representative Tom Brinkman was unable to attend, but Andrew is here. I'd like to present this first of all to Representative Brinkman.
Thank you.
Give us
Some remarks here from the representative. I regret that I could not be in Columbus today, as I attend to a personal commitment, but I'm nonetheless honored and humbled to receive the Defender of Term Limits Award from U.S. Term Limits. When the people of Ohio passed term limits by a landslide in 1992, we sent a message to the machine in Columbus that the era of professional politicians was over. In the years prior to that vote, citizen participation had grinded to a halt, and the longest tenured members of the legislature seemed to control every aspect of state government. With 8-year term limits in place, we have made remarkable progress. Term limits have enacted a pipeline carrying fresh faces, perspectives, and ideas directly from our citizens into the state capitol. In states without limits on tenure, new voices don't have the same opportunity to rise up and energize government, because too often incumbents block their way. That's why it's important for us to keep Ohio's 8-year term limits in place. From the President of the United States all the way down to mayors and city council members, 8 years is the most common and time-honored term limit. It reflects the point at which Ohioans believe their leaders should step aside and give someone new a chance. My constituents always want to discuss term limits. The question is never how to weaken the ones we have here in Ohio. They're only interested in the way we can bring Ohio's term limits to Congress. Referring an anti-term limits amendment to the ballot might be popular among politicians in Columbus for obvious reasons, but that's not who any of us were elected to serve. We were sent here by the voters, and they say 8 is enough. That is why I will continue to do everything in my power to stop the attempt to lengthen term limits. Thank you again for your time and for this honor. Tom Brinkman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. All right, I think that's the general remarks we want to make.